All right, today we're going to be beginning chapter 2. Before we begin chapter 2, we're going to complete this fill-in-the-blank summary for chapter 1. Pay attention because I am going to tell you the answers that go in the blank. At any point, you can press pause to write down your answer and then play to keep hearing. Sam, Tim's older brother, comes home from college in a Patriot uniform. Sam tells everyone at dinner about the Battle of Lexington and Concord. He is excited that the Patriots won. However, his father thinks that Sam's ideas are treason. Later that night, Sam and his father have another argument. Sam wants to take his father's gun to war, but his father needs the gun for his own protection. Sam refuses to take off his uniform, and his father tells him to get out of the house. Then Tim hears his father crying. Today we're going to focus on what inner conflict Tim has in chapter 2. When you have an inner conflict, that's when you are trying to make a decision and you're not sure which choice is the right choice. So you have this inner conflict about what decision you need to make. We want to know why does he have this inner conflict, and what does this inner conflict reveal about him as a person. Before we begin reading, we have 3 vocabulary words. The first word is Tory, and that is an American colonist who supports the British side. They support King George. Okay, and so they're also called loyalists. So draw an arrow from Tory to this picture that says military loyalist. The second word is boasting, and that's another word for brag, or when you have pride in yourself. And so we would draw a line to this button that says, I'm better than you. The last word is rebellion, and that's an open act of violence or resistance towards the government. And this, it's also a synonym for revolution. So we don't have the text projected for you today, so you will need to follow along in your book. So all books should be open, and open to page 24. Open your book to page 24. And as the first time we're reading, remember, we're going to use our CSPS strategy. Okay? And so we're going to really focus on this conversation that Tim has with his father. So it's the next morning, and Tim goes down to eat breakfast, and his father wants to talk to him. But before they have this conversation, on page 24, the author tells us all about the place where Tim lives. And on page 24, in the middle of the page, it talks about how he lives in Reading. And Reading is divided into 2 parts, Reading Center and Reading Ridge. And Tim lives in Reading Ridge. Okay, and if you keep going down, the bottom of page 24, it says, our church in Reading Ridge was the Anglican church. Anglican means English church. In England, everybody has to belong to it, or at least they were supposed to. Top of page 25. In Connecticut, we had freedom of religion, so you could belong to any church you wanted unless you were a Papist. But there were hardly any of them in Connecticut. Over at Reading Center, there was the Presbyterian Church. Naturally, if you were a Presbyterian, you built your house over there, and if you were an Anglican, you built here on the ridge. Although, of course, there were lots of farmers all around who didn't live near either church and just went to the one they wanted. Because our church was the English church, the people here on the ridge seemed to be more on the Tory side and wanted to be loyal to the king. To tell the truth, I didn't exactly understand what the argument was all about. Ever since I can remember, all my life in fact, there have been these discussions and arguments and debates about whether we ought to obey His Majesty's government or whether we should rebel. What kept confusing me about it was the arguments didn't have two sides, the way an argument should, but about six sides. Some people said that the king was the king and that was that, and we ought to do what he said. Other people said that men were supposed to be free to govern themselves, and we should rebel and drive the lobsterbacks out altogether. Some others said, well, we were born Englishmen, and they wanted to die Englishmen, but that the colonies, top of page 26, but that the colonies have to have more say in their own government, and that maybe we'd have to give the lobsterbacks a taste of blood just to show the king that we meant business. Oh, people had all kinds of ideas. That we New Englanders ought to join together, and that all the colonies ought to set up one big government, or that, well, I don't know, I can't even remember all the different sides there were in the argument. I can see how confusing it was when you realize that sometimes Sam's side was called patriots and sometimes they were called rebels. I guess I've been reading newspaper stories about it and hearing people shout over the whole thing for so long that I didn't listen anymore. And it went out in one ear and out the other. Okay, so we'll stop right there because we already have the answers to our character and our setting. And so when we're thinking about who is Tim, Tim lives with his parents in Redding Ridge, and he is confused about this situation with the war. So Tim lives with his parents in Redding Ridge, and he is confused about people's opinions about the war. All the different opinions do not make sense to him. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the setting. And then if we go back on page, so if you're looking for the answer for Tim, you can find that, you can find that on page 26, okay? And if you're looking for the answer about the setting, you can find that on page 24, that second paragraph. Okay? And it tells us about how Tim lives in Redding Ridge, right? He lives in Redding Ridge, Connecticut, and he goes to the Anglican Church on Redding Ridge, and the people that go to the Anglican Church are loyal to the king. Press pause to write down your answer, and then play when you're ready for his problem. Okay, and so if we keep thinking about what we read on page 26, go back up to the top of page 26 where it says, oh, people had all kinds of ideas that we New Englanders ought to join together. And he keeps going and he says, you can see how confusing it was when you realized that sometimes Sam's side was called the Patriots and sometimes they were called the rebels. Right? And he's saying it's just going, all this is just going in one ear and out the other. right? So his problem is that, like, he's confused. He's confused about why people want to go to war. Tim is confused about why people want to go to war. All right, and that's on page 26. Okay, and so then he has this conversation with his father. At the top of page 27, he says, I didn't think Father would want to talk about it. Usually when something important happened, he would just ignore it until he decided what to do. So I was surprised when he brought it up when we were getting ready to go to church. Okay? And so then they have this conversation. And so we're running out of time. And you'll go over this conversation in the whole group with Mr. Greer. But when we're thinking about the conversation, the father tells Tim, basically why he thinks Sam shouldn't go to war, right? So the father, his reaction is that, like, he explains to Tim why he doesn't think Sam should fight. The father explains to Tim why he doesn't think Sam should fight. Okay, and then if we go to page, if we go to the middle of page 28, go to the middle of page 28, Tim says, I decided to forget about the whole thing. It was too worrying. Right? So Tim, he gets overwhelmed with all these different arguments. Remember, like, he's confused about why people are going to war. Like, he's upset that Sam is going to fight. Now his dad is trying to tell him, like, why Sam is wrong. And so Tim gets so overwhelmed that he just wants to forget about the whole situation. And so silently write that down for Tim's reaction. He just wants to forget about the whole situation. All right, and then you have enough time to write your paragraph for number 4. What inner conflict does Tim have in chapter 2? And what does this inner conflict reveal about him as a person? Go.